So first of all, I've got here Kate Belle, who is the author of The Yearning, which is this absolutely beautiful looking book, which is a really original and moving fiction, which has proper characters and proper dialogue and proper everything and a proper plot, but also has some scorching sex and really interesting relationships which frame the scorching sex. So it's not what I know is sometimes called PWP, plot. This is actual proper literature, as they say, and it's a really good read, which I very much enjoyed. She also has a blog which is the Ecstasy Files, where she raves on about all sorts of things, and she assures me she has lots of thoughts about erotic writing, so I'm looking forward to hearing them. I should say that I am dazed and confused after a day with an 8-month-old baby, so you can appreciate that erotic writing is not a huge part of my cosmology at the moment, so I'm extremely keen to hear all about it from these people. So next we've got Krissy Kneen, who is a very wonderful writer who first came to public attention as a bookseller, and then with her memoir Affection, which is an unbelievably intimate, frank, gorgeous, sad, brave, funny, beautiful memoir about her own sexual life and her fantasies. She then followed it with Swallow the Sound, I think is the next one.
Oh, that came first, but yeah.
Oh, that was first? Okay. There you go. That's silly internet. Swallow the Sound, which is a collection of short erotica. Then there is her book Triptych, which I think we'll be discussing this evening, and then her newest one is Steeplechase, soon to be followed by something which is not yet titled, I don't think.
At the moment it's called Holly's Incredible Adventures in the Sex Machine.
Yes. Well, that will do.
But that may change.
Wow. Yes, Krissy was just telling me about it. It sounds really good. And then we have John Purcell, who is a book guy, a bookseller, previously now a book buyer for Booktopia. He is also Natasha Walker, who is the author of the outrageously best-selling trilogy The Secret Lives of Emma, which is... This is the first one, and it's got this extremely seductive cover, which I was just seen reading on the number 3 tram in Down Swanson Street and St Kilda Road with all the office workers. I was reading it like this, just so in case anyone was in any doubt. That is good stuff. So these are our panellists tonight, and I'd really like to welcome them. Now, I'm going to have to try very hard not to do some talking tonight because I'm very interested in erotic literature, but you guys are the practising ones. First of all, I'd like to ask you your thoughts on the fact that we are having all these panels these days post 50 Shades of Grey, and the weird way in which, at least according to the mainstream critical press, apparently 50 Shades was a shock that people are writing sex stuff these days, and people were shocked and they were pleased and they were, flabbergasted, and they all raced out to buy it because they thought that there was sex stuff to be had. And now there's even a 50 Shades of Grey lingerie line at Target, which is lovely. And I was really stunned by this because I had the impression that sex had been around for slightly longer, and especially writing about it. There's a very long and august tradition of sex writing, pornographic writing, erotic writing, sensual writing, and all sorts of things. And yet this is the point at which we've arrived where people think this is really remarkable. So I'd like to just ask you, I suppose, first of all, what's that about? Why is it shocking that, first of all, people are unfamiliar with all the stuff that's happened before or pretend to be, and why is it so disturbing that Tony Abbott was seen on a plane reading 50 Shades of Grey?
Several questions in that.
He didn't understand it, though.
I think I'll just start because I think that shocking people with sex is not a new thing. So 50 Shades is certainly not the first book to shock the public, and not the first piece of sexual art to shock the public. And I do, remember reading about when they uncovered Pompeii in the Victorian era, and the place in Pompeii, people had at that time they had sexy pictures and people having sex on the walls in their kitchen and in their lounge room. So you'd be sitting down having dinner with friends, and there would be someone fucking on the wall next to you, and that wasn't an issue for Pompeii, but when it was uncovered again in Victorian times, it scandalised people. And what they did was immediately they took all that kind of sexy art that they found and they locked it away into a room that was only accessible by scholars. And of course, scholars were only rich males, so they were really protecting women and the poor people from this sexy stuff. So there was a group of people who were intellectual enough to appreciate it, but everybody else was not allowed.
It's still there, you know, in the Naples Museum. It's the secret cabinet, and it's not always open.
Oh, really?
Yes, you need to be lucky to go and see it. It's full of dildos. Great, flying dildos.
I'm off.
Fantastic.
But I think that's a kind of a signal that, you know, when we suddenly speak the unspeakable, when we suddenly talk about things that we don't normally talk about in public, that's when people are scandalised, and bringing, you know, sex into the public eye has done that again and again throughout history.
Yeah. I think we've been conditioned and trained to think that there is something wrong with, you know, enjoying reading sex or watching sex or any of those things, because it's been relegated to the porn industry for so long, and it's very much been a transition into I think the internet has made a huge difference, because a lot of erotic literature is now freely available on the internet, and all of a sudden there's this kind of middle group of people who have always thought of it as porn, who can secretly, you know, look it up on their devices, and nobody knows that they're doing it, and you know, they can cross over into that porn world without fear of retribution or judgment. You know, before they had to walk into some sleazy shop and, you know, through the back door down the alleyway, hoping that no one would see them, and then get a greasy from the guy standing behind the counter. So it was kind of a very male-dominated, pornography-dominated area, and I think that's what's great about the internet, is it's actually allowed people to start feeling a bit more comfortable with it. And even though it's still, the shock is the overhang of that Victorian set of values that just seems to impregnate Western culture. It's just embedded in it.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, what struck me is sorry, I'd like to hear your thoughts, Jo, but I just was so struck with the 50 Shades thing that it was so late. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I was writing online porn or erotica like more than 10 years ago, and the internet has now been around for some time, and before that there were other things. So there were like Xerox, you know, zines and things that people had. And it just seems that, of course, the other thing is most of us have had sex at some stage.
Yes.
So it's not that it's so exotic. It's not that it's that unfamiliar or that other. It's just that we have this constant reiteration of kind of naivety which goes around it. It's almost like we want it to be secret and dangerous and dirty. Do you have that feeling about things?
I don't think it was about sex.
No,
I don't think 50
either.
Shades was about sex.
No.
I think it was like Twilight. It was like Dan Brown before that. It was like The Secret before that. Some people just get ridiculously lucky and it just takes off. And it didn't matter about the content. It was about the sudden explosion of people being seen reading the same thing, which happens sort of cyclically through book selling. You keep going back and you keep looking at different ones that do this. And on this occasion, it wasn't paranormal. It wasn't secrets from Baby Jesus or from Dan Brown. It was sex.
Although it was paranormal in its first iteration when it was first out. The original 50 Shades of Grey was paranormal, and it was a Twilight fan fiction, and it was vampires, and that's all kind of been removed from the text. So, I mean, there's that tipping point, isn't there, when X amount of people are talking about a book, then suddenly everyone's reading it. But I think one of the good things about 50 Shades of Grey sort of doing this is it has highlighted a whole lot of sexual classics that have now been rejacketed to look like 50 Shades of Grey. The Story of O is back. And, you know, Story of O is really worth reading. And so it's fantastic that it's back in the new 50 Shades jacket because, you know, whatever you think of 50 Shades, The Story of O is a really interesting text that changed, you know, people's relationship to literature at the time.
Yeah. So. I don't think it's an accident that E.L. James was a TV executive
Right.
You know, she had connections.
The eye. Yeah.
Her husband has
And
connections and it didn't help him.
Yeah.
He's had 2 books out that just gone...
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
the
but
zeitgeist
it's
of-
kind of, you know, it took the imagination of the media, and the media grabbed it. Like, I remember when it started to take off here, you know, every second high-profile media person was rabbiting on about reading this book. They've probably read many more porn books. They just didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
They had this kind of... There was a permissive atmosphere that allowed people to sort of go, ooh, aren't I naughty? I'm reading 50 Shades of Grey.
Well, we do get that with you know, TV, breakfast talk shows and radio stations. They have to pull this really conservative line because their advertisers need them to be really conservative. So what's shocking on breakfast TV is not shocking to us in our daily lives, and yet we go along with it.
Yeah, that's what
we sit there and go along with, ooh, when we don't care.
No.
Well, I was going to say, look, I mean, people have the idea it's only kind of sleazy old guys or, you know, frumpy housewives who are supposed to be so hilariously interested in porn and erotica, and that, you know, everyone who reads this kind of stuff must probably have quite a pathetic life themselves. I think that's the corollary, that if you're reading these fantasies, maybe your own personal sex life is lacking. But I'd like to point out we have an audience, a sellout audience of people in this room who presumably are not pitiful perverts, surely not at the Wheeler Centre. I can't imagine this. So I wonder who's reading this stuff. I mean, not everyone read 50 Shades. I'm sure there are, well, at least 3 people I know didn't. Lots of people mocked it despite that. And I was wondering, who are the readers of this stuff? And I suppose primarily I'd like to know, are you readers of erotica that yourselves for fun, or is this something that you've chosen to write as a commercial or an artistic decision?
I'm a reader of a different kind of erotica, I think, to the 50 Shades kind, and also to more genre erotica. I'm a big reader of the classics, and have, you know, even struggled my way through Marquis de Sade, which was quite an effort.
Wow.
And I run a sex book club as well, and we look at a new sexual classic every month, and that's been absolutely fantastic to force me to read Marquis de Sade, but also to discover some fantastic new authors that have been around for hundreds of years, who are actually doing such different things. Like when you read someone like, there's a surrealist writer called Georges Bataille, and when you read his book, The Story of the Eye, you realise that there just ain't nothing out there like that today. There is nothing like that book. And that book, if it was one, it wouldn't be released into the market today because it would be way too shocking. And if it was released, it would just cause a furore. But it's out there. It's a classic. It's in a really classy Penguin classic edition. And people who haven't read it don't realise that what's lurking inside actually will kind of change the way you think about sex. And there are images in that book you can't get out of your head forever. And that's a good thing. Like, some of them are shocking, but it's a really good thing that it's changed your thinking.
What about you, Kate? Do you write the stuff you'd like to read?
I suppose I do. I actually don't set out to write about sex. It just happens as part of the story. I think the great thing about erotica is that it is about that very deep personal experience that goes on the inside of us, and we keep it in the shadows. We don't openly talk about our feelings and experiences in that realm, which is what Krissy's referring to. And I think it's a really important thing to take that stuff and put it into a form that's digestible, because otherwise we carry it around and it becomes darker and it's more of our shadow, and it can have a more damaging impact on us and the people that we're relating to. Okay. I think it's not that I set out to write this stuff. It just kind of happens because I'm interested in what drives people and what motivates people, and sex is a really important motivator. And I think, the people who are reading particularly commercial erotic fiction, the 50 Shades of Grey commercial erotic fiction, are actually romance readers. Yeah. We have a huge... Romance is one of the biggest selling genres, as you guys will know. And, all its subgenres have... Mills and Boon have had their hot and sexy imprints for decades. So it's nothing new to the romance readers, but they're delighted because they have got more of that now. They don't have to go to the hot and sexy Mills and Boon. It's kind of taken the sweetness out of romance and put a lot of the hot and sexy in there, and the romance readers love it because they're getting the romance and they're getting the erotica together. But that I don't like to read that stuff too much because it's a little bit too predictable. I like the stuff that Krissy's talking about too, the more literary sort of versions, because they're not as banal in their descriptions of sex. They talk about what goes on around it. Susan Johnson, Tobsha Lerner, they when they talk about sex, it's what sits around it, not the act itself, and that's what fascinates me, I think.
Oh, I'd like to come back to that point. But John, what about you? I mean, what made you decide to write erotica?
Oh, a girl made me decide. It was kind of a competitive urge, actually. A fellow that I knew that was interested in the same girl I was interested in had written her a story, and I thought, bugger that.
Right.
I can do better than that. So I started to give her little sketches and stories, and it grew from that. And one of the things that I found most difficult in that, having an immediate audience, and she would pass it amongst her friends, was they all had very strong opinions about what women would do and wouldn't do, and I started to have very strange characters because of the many personalities they had within them. So I had to settle on a particular person and say, well, this is what Emma would do, and I started writing about Emma and creating a character out of that, and these stories started to come out, and they became better because I could justify what was going on because of that. But I wrote all that in 2003. I mean, I had this big pile of pages, probably 150,000 words about Emma in a drawer, and I just left it there because I didn't think that anyone would ever want to read it.
Apparently.
Like you said, some people strike it lucky.
Yeah.
Exactly. So when I was trying to get another book published, a completely different sort of thing, and my agent said, look, I'm having trouble, have you got anything else? And I said, well, I've got this thing in my drawer, if you want to have a look at it. It's very naughty. And she started to read it, and she said, well, it's very, very naughty. I don't think anyone's going to publish that. And within a week of her saying that, the 50 Shades was on the front page of the Herald, and she ran off, and I was being published within a month after that date.
It's amazing.
So
Thank you, E.L. James.
Streaming into the zeitgeist.
So what you need to do is you need to have a zombie book in the drawer, a paranormal book in the drawer, an erotic novel in the drawer, one about...
Just waiting to go.
Yeah, you should all have a full deck at all times. Well, this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, there is such a range of erotic writing, and there is the commercial end, and, I was just thinking, you was talking about Dan Brown and so on. I mean, post kind of 50 Shades and this, very big commercial thing, and republishing old classics as well as part of that. But does that kind of use it all up? It strikes me that with erotica, tell me what you think of this. Erotica is often trying to be both very legitimate, like we spend a lot of time saying it's proper writing, it's proper stuff, there are proper characters, it's got all, the hallmarks of actual art. And then at the same time we want to say, but it's so dangerous, it's so kind of outlaw, and it's so, renegade and elusive. And then at the same time we want to say it's got all this kind of art in it, but then it has to be kind of, real and raw and passionate. And of course underneath all of this is the idea is it's meant to get you off somehow, and we don't like to talk about that very much. So it seems like all of this stuff is trying to cover so many bases. Is that the joy of it, in fact, that you can't pin it down?
Good art is dangerous. Like, I actually think good art is dangerous for me. I think that if you're not doing art that feels like it's pushing the world forward a little bit, then it's not the best art that can be, because if you see something that gives you that visceral shock, whether it be a pornographic piece in a novel, or whether it be a piece on the wall that you suddenly are startled by, that's doing something new, and I think that's what art should do. So I actually think that the best erotic writing can actually, has a really good chance of doing that, because it's touching a nerve that we don't normally have exposed. And it's exposing that nerve for everybody to touch. And I think that you can do that, and you can also write something to get people off at the same time. Those things are not mutually exclusive at all.
I should say that the sound tech, when we came in to see our sound check just before, he said if you speak loudly enough, the audience will feel it. And we said, feel it? Oh, my God. We don't know where they've been, these people. So we don't want to be touched quite that much in that sense. What about you, Kate?
Well, I think I agree with you, Krissy. I think... but I don't think it needs to be high art to touch a nerve. Like, I do think that there are plenty of dangerous ideas in commercial fiction if you go looking, and I did last night. I went and had a look at monster porn. Has anyone read any monster porn? It's terrifying. Like, you will need...
You have read Krissy's triptych, haven't you?
I have,
yeah.
But that,
They're real animals.
They're
not monsters.
They're right, that's true. They're not dinosaurs and they're not Bigfoot.
Actual wildlife.
Yeah. And I mean, there was something about triptych that draws you in slowly, so your boundaries drop as you go there. This other stuff
just drops the boundaries
well,
immediately.
there aren't boundaries really. It is a cross between a B-grade horror movie and 1970s pornography. Like, it's that horrific, people. You've got a series, and there's 12 of them, count them, called Cum, C-U-M, for Bigfoot. So Bigfoot is stomping around in the wilds. These things are only 20,000 words long. Stomping around, and you've got to pay $3 for them. Stomping around in the wild.
I'd pay $3 for that.
I've got a quote somewhere. I thought I had it with me, but it's back in my bag in the back room. But it goes along something like from the matted hair came a large penis whose dimensions defied logic. It was riddled with intersecting blue veins, and the end bulged like a tennis ball. Now, there's nothing about that really turns me on.
Yes, but I've got to say, but did anyone see the First Tuesday Book Club last night? Because they were talking about Dave Eggers' new novel, The Circle, and there was a horrific line in that about someone envisaging a penis as a log in a campfire but covered in milk. It was, yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's I want to get onto the bad stuff, bad stuff later. In fact, actually, speaking of bad stuff and perhaps even good stuff, I think maybe it would be time to have a bit of a reading, since we're hearing actual pornography and erotica here on stage. Could I impose upon you, Kate, to read a little bit out of your work?
Okay. It's that one. I'll just give you a little bit of context to this. We've got 3 minutes, which is, as John pointed out, very difficult to pull out a piece of erotic from a whole novel in 3 minutes. So the context is she is 16. This is her first time. She's been sending erotic love letters to her very handsome, very charismatic, very promiscuous teacher. So yes, he's her teacher, and this is not his first time by any stretch of the imagination. "Don't move," he whispered. "You've woken something in me, and I want to show it to you." He threaded his fingers gently through the hair at her temples and drew her face toward his. Her lips parted as he bent to kiss her. Softness like she never imagined. He wasn't rough or callous or muscular as in her fantasies, but warm and pliant, and she yielded immediately. His kisses were full of a juicy intensity, his attention focused on her inner lips and tongue. His every movement, his voice, the feel of his breath on her skin, his quiet words lulled and pacified her. She melted into a soft, sensuous sensation. His hands explored her body, and she allowed his deft fingers to roam under her skirt and over her flesh. He seemed to know just where to touch. She felt goosebumps rise and fall away to a delicious quiver. Feelings grew, ripened, and burst in her, filling her with a rich lustfulness. She felt the edge of his oval bed at the back of her knees and wavered. He was experienced, and she knew nothing. Would she disappoint him? She wished she knew what to do. She clung to his shoulders and pressed her lips to his chest hair brushing her cheek. She had no choice but to hand herself over to him, let him guide her, let him take her for his own. The room filled with the pale blue twilight. A slender white disk of moon peeped at them from the corner of the window. The only sound was the wind moaning softly around the house. Hardly daring to move, she waited as he pressed his desire to her flesh. His hands and eyes explored, searched for and found her. Like a branding iron, he imprinted himself upon her skin, writing his name to private places where it would be forever hidden but never forgotten. He sat her on the edge of his bed and separated her knees. She bit her lip as he knelt before her, unsure of what was coming. He smiled before he ducked his head and gently nibbled and licked the inner secret of her thighs. At the touch of his tongue to her clitoris, she threw her head back and the room filled with her gasp. She squirmed with shock and pleasure, surprised by the intensity of it. She was aware of the strange prickling of his beard against her virgin skin and a funny wobbly fear in her stomach that made her weak. She wanted to leap away and at the same time wrap herself around him. He held her hips tightly to keep her from moving. He wanted her still so she could feel the power in him. He wanted her motionless and ecstatic. She began to whimper and moan, the sweet, youthful, briny scent of her overwhelming him. Her surprise at every new touch filled him with a bewildering pleasure. He lapped at her, slaking a thirst that had grown in him since the letters had begun to arrive. Sounds evaporated from her, breath and sighs combining to a siren song that almost drove him mad. He thought he'd explored the limits of desire in his life, but now those limits stretched and he discovered an unknown, almost savage passion within.
Gosh.
He's a very bad boy.
I've got to get out of the house more often. Coming here. I wanted to ask, does Erotica have to be written at night? I mean, did you sit down at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning to write that passage, or does this something belongs to the shadow times?
Yeah, actually, I might have, but I don't think it... well, look, I wrote that with my daughter who was like 3 or 4 at the time, in between sleeping and naps in kinder. So, you know, it was a matter of have to write it at other times. I made the stupid mistake of going to a library once with my laptop to write a chapter, and this very, very hot sex scene with, you know, the iPod in with the hot music going on in the back. And after an hour, I was sweaty and I just thought, this is really not a good thing to do in public. So I never do it in public.
Even your
because I was
fingertips were
blushing and sweaty and,
wow,
you know, I was getting quite worked up. So I just thought, no, I'm not doing that.
I'm sure the State Library has a special room for erotic writers.
I hope so. They should.
Yeah, they should have a...
Yeah, lots of velvet.
It's probably very good physiological exercise, though, isn't it?
Yes.
I always write in public. That's
do you?
I always.
Did you write that in public?
Yeah, I did actually in cafes.
Wow.
And the reason is because if you're at home, you wank too much. You spend too much time masturbating. It's absolutely essential that you leave the house.
Yes.
Impossible.
I never had time to do that.
It's impossible to write it at home. And in public, there's also this I just really enjoy the idea that you're writing this stuff and that person over there, you know, having an argument with their, you know, I don't know, uncle, is not knowing what you're doing. I love the fact that you can kind of, you know, it's like having sex in public. It's fantastic. So you've got to do it.
Is that the sexiest thing about it then, the writing it secretly in public?
That's part of the sexiest thing about it, I think. Yeah, definitely that idea of being, you know, so public about it, and it's what the 50 Shades people, you know, do when they read it in public too. It's that kind of thing of I'm reading this kind of saucy erotica in, you know, and that person on the bus.
Yeah, and here we all are.
Yeah, here we all are, and that's part of the whole thing. Who doesn't like having sex in public? The people who don't like having sex in public.
It gets so breezy and you get So, anyway,
mosquitoes.
There's a tram stop. John, can I ask you, do you get people who've read your books coming up to you? I mean, do people know who you are as the author? Do you do signings and events?
No, nothing.
In drag?
I missed all that because I was Natasha Walker for so long. So by the time I decided to come out, it was, thankfully, most of it was over.
How would you feel if people came up, as they now may indeed this evening, and say, I'd love you to...
I had my first encounter when I wasn't expecting it the other day, and someone had read the whole 3. And it just popped out. And I read all your books, and I didn't know where to go or what to say or anything.
Oh, good. I'm so sorry.
Well, as you said before, there is an extra purpose to it, and people read for another purpose. So I've just become, just by saying that, I've just become intimate with you.
Yes.
I now know.
That's true.
I now know what you've been doing.
Isn't it like you think I know you've had a thing for this? Yeah, you didn't just sit there reading it.
You wouldn't go through it if you weren't going to. At one point, enjoy it. And if I haven't done that, then I failed in what I was attempting to do.
And can I mention that there's at least a 35-page description of oral sex? I think in this book it went on and on.
That's great.
I was like, what happens next?
Really good.
And gosh. So a lot of the art of your writing, I think, is in stringing it out, and so the stakes get high. And
that came back because every time I handed one of those short stories to a female reader, they would say, "We're not Penthouse. We don't. It all doesn't happen in 2 pages.
Take your time.
Just take your time, explore it."
Yeah.
And so these stories got longer and longer and longer.
Longer and longer.
That's great. But isn't that one of the pleasures too of writing erotica? You know, one of them is writing and turning yourself on in public, and the other thing is like looking at the public, and if they say, "I've read your book," knowing that they've come, you've made that person. Well, hopefully, you've made that person come at some point, and that is absolutely fantastic.
That's
you have
powerful.
all these other lovers that you don't even know about. No sexually transmitted diseases. Absolutely safe sex. Absolutely.
That's a beautiful thing.
I used to write slash fiction in an online community, and the interesting thing about that for me, I want to talk about empathy and imagination, but I just want to mention that a lot of the people who were writing in my community we were all writing homosexual male sex partnerings, except that most of us were women, and in fact a huge proportion of us were lesbians, and a huge proportion of us were both lesbians and or virgins. So there seemed to be a great revelation to me that you did not actually have to be capable or have had sex at all in order to do what was incredibly scorching male gay sex, and yet the imagination was powerful enough to get past all of that. I guess writing erotica, you're imagining, in your case, as you're scene, you're trying to get into the head of both of your protagonists. You're doing it from Emma's point of view, but, she's a female character. You're doing it from all sorts of points of view, Krissy. How much of it is an exercise in that really beautiful part about sexuality, which is imagining how someone else feels?
A big part. That was, for me, that was really, my interest was what are you feeling? What are you feeling when you're with me? How can I make you feel better? Where can I take you on this? And it's always been to do that. You sort of throw yourself into your partner's head for a while and try to work out what's what. And if you're like me, you do it for 150,000 words. You start to get a little obsessed with it. But I really wanted to explore that side because I wanted to know. I wanted to know how to be a good lover with the partner that I was with.
You really do have to think, well, what turns me on, and then maybe does that turn other people on, or maybe not. Maybe it's just my kink. Maybe but maybe that's the interesting thing, isn't it?
The erotic urge is common to everyone, though. No matter what the kink, no matter what the fantasy, whether it's a dinosaur or a person of the same gender or an octopus, or a dog. It's the erotic urge comes from somewhere right down deep in the guts, and everybody recognises that. So if you can, as a writer, tap into that and draw that up and out of yourself and pour it into whatever the character is, you could have Charlie Brown and Lucy, and they could be, really sexy if you draw on that part of yourself. I think it's a common thing, and that's why people love reading it. And I think that's why the fantasies are so diverse, because now there is a story for every possible fantasy you can possibly think of. And if there's not, write it and put it on the internet, because somebody else will have it too. It's very validating, you know, and people realise, well, you know, I'm not abnormal. I'm not strange for having these feelings, and I'm not weird for having these fantasies. Nancy Friday wrote a fantastic couple of books about women's fantasies, and women's fantasies are far more rich, diverse, deep than I think anyone has ever really given women credit for. And I think that's what's great about the 50 Shades, post 50 Shades phenomena, is that that part of womanhood has been unleashed in all its glory. What a zeitgeist. It's great.
So do you think, you know, I mean, I think a lot of people imagine that men read and write porn, you know, manly, brutal, you know, punchy stuff, and women write, you know, kind of soft cock erotica, which is all kind of lovely feelings and gossamer and gauzy, kind of black lacy, what's it? I mean, is that right, John? You're a man who's writing as a woman with a female protagonist?
I don't. I mean, I always thought that women wrote it all. That all those ones that were on the internet written by men were generally written by women. You could see it because they had the patience to go so long.
That's so lovely. That's so lovely.
Not everyone is. Like Triptych, I particularly, I kind of developed this kind of rigorous, I was doing it for a PhD program at the time, and I developed this rigorous thing where every 3 pages there had to be a sex scene. I couldn't go more than 3 pages without a sex scene. I wanted it to be a relentless amount of sex, because I actually was really interested in exploring literary pornography. And, you know, if you kind of have too much time between sex, and it becomes erotica, because I think that the difference between erotica and pornography is that in erotica the relationship is foregrounded, but in pornography the sex is foregrounded and the relationship is backgrounded. So I was really looking at foregrounding the sex, and so you couldn't go very far without having a sex scene, but I still wanted to have a flow and a drive and, you know, a build up, and I still wanted to have characters. But it became this rhythmic thing where I was like, how many pages have I got? I've got to do another sex scene. And that's actually really challenging for a writer, because you have to vary it. You know, you can't just have it, same as any relationship. If you have the same sex every time, it's going to be really boring.
I remember getting up to writing about my 700th, you know, gay male sex scene between these 2 characters. I was like, so tired. I just can't do it anymore. I can't put that thing in that other thing anymore. I can swim just only so many ways. I mean, that's the thing that I found so fascinating about my online community, was there was a whole lot of people doing both things, a whole lot of women doing plot and then these other things. And speaking of monster stuff, we had something called wing fic, where the conceit was very fanciful that just everyone had wings. And so you had to build wings into the scenario, whether they were angel wings or bird wings, or people just woke up one day like Metamorphosis, not a beetle but with wings. And it was all kind of like very sweet, but then actually not so sweet, actually, in the hands of these terrifyingly talented 18-year-old lesbian virgins in Ottawa who are, you know, out there somewhere now doing terribly interesting things, I'm sure.
They're the ones riding Bigfoot, probably.
Yeah. True. But just to go back quickly before we finish up with a second reading, do you think then, considering that women are writing so much of this stuff but have traditionally been ridiculed for reading it, and I personally have sat at Writers' Festival panels with a whole lot of middle-aged men on the stage mocking 50 Shades of Grey for all it's worth, you know, because they think, how hilarious, all these women reading stuff, isn't it so funny, these frumpy housewives? And it made me so furious. Do you think that writing and reading erotica is a feminist act then? Do you think it's a powerful act just to do it?
I actually think that it is women claiming back their sexuality from a realm that has always been controlled and monitored by men. So even in the literary world, you know, the censorship around erotica and pornography has predominantly been via a criteria that's been set by the patriarchy. And I think this bloom of erotic fiction is women asserting their sexuality. They're actually saying, well, this is how we want to have sex and this is how we want to have our fantasies, and we'll write them for ourselves, and we don't need you. We don't care what you say. We don't care about your judgments. We don't care about your restrictions and your control. We're stepping out of what you have always told us we should fit into sexually, and we're redefining it for ourselves. And I think that is so exciting. I really do. I mean, I'm no fan of 50 Shades, let's make that clear. But I think what it has done, it has opened the door for that to happen, and our sexual archetypes are changing. We are in a process of evolving, and I think that's really good.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's in a context of like otherwise very dare I say, patriarchal or traditional over-sexualisation of lots of other things and objectification of women, all sorts of contemporary cultural ways. But there's this little sneaky thread, I suppose, running through things. I mean, what do you think?
It's not always a feminist act. It's really easy to kind of just maintain the status quo, and I actually think that's what 50 Shades does.
Yep.
Really, 50 Shades is an anti-S&M book, because it's about taking a guy who's into S&M and changing his red room of pain into a baby's room. Mm-hmm. Basically, that's... Oh, sorry, I spoiled the end. But basically, that's kind of the trajectory of that book, is to take the unspeakable and tame it and make it speakable again. And the promise of there's promise of all this kind of steamy, strange sex in it. And there's even the promise of anal sex in it. There's not an anal sex scene in it. Mm-hmm. And you kind of go through the whole thing and go, there's this build up and this promise of S&M, but there actually isn't a great deal of any of that stuff in it, and it's just about conforming in the end. Whereas you can change that. You don't have to write that sort of stuff, and that's where it can be a feminist act. If you look outside what's traditionally the way we have of the wild men being tamed by the women, which is not really a very feminist plot line.
I felt that with my book, before it came out that I was a man, it was fed. It was. I mean, I don't think Random House really even read it before they just rushed off and put this into print. They just needed something to throw onto the great fire that was there, and they just, "Ooh, this'll do," throw it on. Because the reaction of most readers in that time is most of them are horrified. That she's so callous towards her husband, that she doesn't believe in marriage and that she gets married, that she is having this affair and goes on to have more. It was something. I mean, a lot of romance readers pretty much said, "I don't read anything about infidelity, any character."
Yeah.
And there's no promise of a happy ending in this. It doesn't look like it's heading anywhere especially at the end of the first book, towards any happy ending for Emma or anything. And the readers of 50 Shades who picked it up with all the others just came onto Goodreads and places like that and just ripped it to shreds. Absolutely. Because they hated her. They hated what she was doing and that she could not be faithful to her husband.
Well, I was actually struck because you have a whole section just when you're introducing Emma where you actually talk about her ethics. There's a whole chapter devoted to this, and you say she'd read widely on the subject of morality and rejected most moral systems as basically sexist. They tended to reflect the supposed needs of women in the world greatly different from the one that she found herself in. So, I mean, you're making her a real heroine at that point, aren't you? You're staking it.
All the women I know and all the women that I was involved with in 10 years ago were those kind of women that were just they weren't listening to anyone else's opinion. They were just living their own life and doing their own thing, and a lot of them frightened the hell out of me, but they excited me, and I wanted to follow them and learn from them and talk to them and be around them because they were so individualistic and completely. They were looking at each set of rules and examining them and going, this doesn't apply to me.
Yeah.
Oh, this one, I can have that one. And making their own decisions, generally based on what was going on at the time, not bringing old decisions and forcing them into a new circumstance. And that's what I wanted to make Emma, is someone who could be moral in the moment and make her own decisions in the moment and always be aware that these things are changing.
I think that points to how big a ship this is to turn around, because the perceptions of female sexuality are so deeply embedded that the idea of infidelity is so terrifying to people they can't even read about it.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, I got the same thing with the Yearning. The idea of a 16-year-old girl having sex with a teacher is so immoral that some people just couldn't even read about it. So, you know, if people can't even read it, a piece of fiction, where are their heads in terms of actually making that shift? So I think it's really important that books like that are out there, and because it does, as you say, starts pushing the boundaries. And okay, softly with some of the books that are out there, but at least they're starting to push it, and women are starting to read about sexual stuff, and they're starting to write about it, and you know, slowly those boundaries will start to shift and we'll get a new vision of what female sexuality is about. And I think that's, you know, that's why Emma is important.
Wow, it sounds like erotica and pornography is like the, you know, the burning frontier, isn't it? Like out there into the savannah of the brave future. We're going to have to finish up our session here and leave some time for some questions from the audience. But I might ask Krissy if she would round us off with a little bit of her work from Triptych.
Absolutely. So we have talked about the octopus a few times, and I will just plunge in, so to speak. We have Leda, who's our heroine. Triptych's broken into 3 parts, and each part explores a different type of perversity. So not all of it is about bestiality, but the second part looks at a woman who basically is only interested in animals. And at this point, she is in a rock pool. Leda held the fish tightly between her fingers, pressed just under the hard protrusion of a nipple. The creature launched himself onto her suddenly, one tentacle curling up and around Leda's arm, the other 7 clutched around her ribcage, and exquisitely she felt the suctioned creep of a tentacle curling around a nipple. The thrill of that strange touch, half mouth, half finger, was almost too much for Leda. She relinquished the fish too quickly, and the octopus climbed across her body and back to its position on the rock wall. 2 more fish. Leda knew she would have to use them strategically. She felt the heady mix of pheromones making her body feel heavy and light all at once, the chill buoyancy of the water melding with the sleepy warmth of desire. She cinched her knees up towards her chest. She was wet with her own juices already, thicker, more viscous than the seawater, slicking the edges of her cunt with the slipperiness of seaweed, the briny reek of kelp. She carefully slipped the fish between her labia, a quick, cold shock of slippery silver. She was careful to hold onto the tiny head. It was difficult to push her hips forward, offering herself to the octopus's tentacles while keeping her head clear of the water. She managed to hook her toes onto the rock wall, her other hand paddling through the water like the fin of her own to keep her body steady and upright. From this position, she lost sight of them both. Then a shiver coursed down her spine as she felt the weight of the male octopus's body slip comfortably over her thighs. Octopuses are clever. She had seen one open a screw-top flask with a quick curl of the leg. She felt a tentacle slip easily into that thatch of coarse hair around the lips of her vagina, and in an instant popped the bait inside herself. She felt the tight lips close over the fish like a press seal, held her breath for a moment, hoping that the octopus would not be deterred by its inability to see the reward. She felt the slow creep of the suckers, the tacky pull of them grabbing her flesh in little circular love bites, the muscular tip of the tentacles stretching for the opening, finding the place between her cunt lips. 2 tentacles now, parting the flesh, and a sudden, stabbing entry. The octopus leg slipped quickly inside her. She felt the curl of it grabbing at the fish that was lodged there, the finger becoming a fist as it wrapped around the little treat. Leda gulped at the air and then abandoned the idea of breathing, curling her body downward so that she could concentrate on the sight of the creature lodging there. The octopus was cradled at the top of her thigh, its limbs snaking out and around her leg, caressing the cleft between her buttocks. She could see the single, elegant leg disappearing into her body, her thick lips parted, the muscular tentacle buried deep within her.
Thank you, Krissy. Isn't that gorgeous?
Love it.
Okay. We've got some time for questions if anyone would like to interrogate anyone on the subjects canvassed, or any others? Would anyone like to have a question? We've got some roving mics around. Oh yes, there's one person over that way. Yeah, there's someone with their hand up.
Hi. One thing I was fascinated by a couple of months ago, I was reading about the Sherlock Holmes TV show, and apparently in Japan it's quite common for the Japanese women to be writing this amazingly homoerotic gay porn, and it just seemed so out of context, and you've given me a bit of context that it just seems to be completely out of your normal realm, so you write erotica around it. Do you think it's getting more, like you're talking about monster porn and everything, is that because people are seeing this sort of stuff on the internet and they're going in those directions, or it's always been there and there's never really been a way of sharing it?
What do you think? You're the one who's been recently delving in the crevices of the internet.
My mind will never be the same. I need bleach.
It's human imagination, though.
It is, and I think it probably has always been around, but there's been no way of sharing it broadly. I mean, you go back to some of the really old classic Marquis de Sade, it's not new. If you really look in research erotica, old erotica, there were drawings and short stories that were circulated very secretly within a small group of, wealthy men. Nin was paid with her group of writers to write erotic stuff, and they had to take all the heart out of it and just write pornography. I don't think it's new. It's just that it's out there now.
The Japanese have a big history of monster porn, actually. I think it might be new to the West, but certainly if you look back into classic Japanese pornography, even there's a guy who won the Nobel Prize for Literature called Yusunawi Karabata, and he has a fantastic short story about a disembodied arm that he takes home and has sex with, and that has sex with him. And there's no question about why this arm is still alive when he takes it away from the woman that he takes it from to take it home with him. There's lots about the ethics of using her arm to masturbate him, but there's not any question about why the arm does that. The Japanese have a really long and beautiful, varied history of strange sexual practices. And I actually think I'd love to go to Japan and research Japanese pornography, because that's where it's at.
Yeah.
Like, we are way behind.
We are. That Victorian area really did us in.
Don't forget the Greek myths.
Oh, of course.
Look at all those statues and the Lady Europa, and there's just so many. Leda and the Swan.
Oh, they had a lot of bestiality.
Yeah,
the
lots
Greeks.
of tons. Yeah.
Awesome.
Just if I could just add a note about it's called slash fiction, the stuff where you take a TV show and you write kind of porn about it. It's called slash because you use a slash mark to describe the relationship between the characters. You're going to decide to have a relationship even though they don't have it in the canon version, and it generally is acknowledged to have started with Star Trek. So Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock had a passionate relationship which went past most of the TV scriptwriters. But what I mostly remember about the Star Trek stuff was that apparently Mr. Spock had this four-leafed pronged penis, like his foreskin was barbed like a cat's.
Wow.
And it came in 4 parts, and there was this endlessly agonising kind of dilemma in the stories, because if he ever did consummate his love for Captain Kirk and penetrate his anus, he would have ripped the man asunder and their love would be no more. And this was the excruciating conundrum at the heart of their unresolved sexual tension. And it went on for ages. This was Housewives in the 60s in Alabama writing this stuff, and it's only got better since then. It's great.
Star Trek was really ahead of its time anyway. It had the first interracial kiss on television.
That's right.
Was between Uhura and Captain Kirk. So they were out there, and they would have been very happy. The writers loved it.
They would have too.
Well, it's a funny thing, because there are some what seem to be extremely inappropriate pairings done on the internet, but because they're using often mainstream TV shows and books and so on, there's this added kind of dilemma as to whether the creator would approve of it. So J.K. Rowling, I think, is okay with some of Harry Potter stuff, but not all of it, depending if it's with children and so on. And other people are, George Martin is completely against Game of Thrones / because he says, fuck off, they're my characters, I've put a lot of work into them, but the fact is the internet is renegade and it'll do what it wants.
That's right. That's true.
So it's out there. Have we got another question? Yes, sir.
You said before you were, writing with your children around. I was wondering, do you experience any discrimination from, people when you, take the kids to school or something like that? So, all do-gooders sort of thinking you're an evil woman or,
Yeah, I personally haven't. The worst I got was when I was dropping my daughter off for camp one morning, and I got chatting to one of the mums, and I don't know how the erotic writing came up, but when I said I'm an erotic writer, she just burst out laughing. She pissed herself, and I thought, I don't know what that means. Are you laughing because that's a ridiculous idea, or I wasn't really sure. But I do know a lot of commercial erotic fiction writers who will not tell anyone. They live in small towns in rural Australia, and they do not let anyone know. Their families don't even know. They don't. They write very secretly. At most, their partner might know, and that's it. Because of what you talk about, they get very seriously judged. People are afraid of losing their jobs if their bosses find out that they write erotic fiction. Mm-hmm. So we live in a very conservative country, sadly.
Yeah, still dangerous. I think we've got time for one question or two if they're very quick. Any more? Yes, there's one person in the middle that's there, about halfway down and in the middle of the aisle.
Hey, how's it going? I was just wondering, it seems to be implied through most of this conversation, which is great that this is mostly, well, the majority of it is for women, to the extent where we've asked questions about whether or not it's feminist. However, at the same time, there's this sort of contrast between these feminist concerns and the actual really sexy scenes that have almost on the surface layer anti-feminist power dynamic implied. I was just wondering, as erotic writers, how do you reconcile that kind of maybe a problem that we may be attracted to things that we're not really allowed to do in society as that's... Yeah, do you know what I mean? We're not... That isn't endorsed by society and yet is so attractive and yet also seems anti-feminist. How do you reconcile that kind of...
Well, that's the Nancy Friday stuff we were talking about before, because when Nancy Friday, published in 1974, I think it was, My Secret Garden, and suddenly women's sexual fantasies were out there, she got kind of attacked a bit by her feminist sisters who said, you're talking about women who have rape fantasies, and this is, surely this is a bad thing to tell the world. And I think what you fantasise in your own head is completely up to you. If you want to get off on that, you are in power, and therefore you're empowered to do that. And I think the story of O particularly looks at that, because it looks at a submissive who gains power through her submission. But personally, I don't feel in control of my craft enough to look at sex as from those perspectives yet. So all of my sex reflects my very open ethical framework. So in my own work, I haven't gone there yet, but I would actually like to one day feel brave enough to kind of explore people whose fantasies are to be humiliated, and to see how that plays out.
I'm aware of a couple of writers that aren't well known here. One of them is Kari Silverwood, and she writes really mess with your head erotic fiction. She writes capture fantasies and dominant submission fantasies, and even people who read a lot of BDSM fantasy find her stuff really challenging, because there is a blurry line around consent. So, there are people out there who are doing it, and I think that it's a good thing, because if you don't go to the places where you're not supposed to go, you can't explore them, and you can't examine them, and you can't question them. So we need a framework to do that, and because these are dark sexual fantasies, what better way to do it than on the paper, because it's safe. It's perfectly safe. No one's getting hurt. It's all in the head. So yeah,
Well, it's very dangerous in this climate. When you're thinking of a lot of the different perversions that are out there, I mean, the internet is there permanently. What you're reading, what you're viewing is out there permanently. So going beyond the boundaries of society on the internet isn't safe. It isn't. It isn't unwatched.
No, that's true.
Some perversions are much worse in the eyes of society than others, and even just fantasising about it is much worse. I mean, your 16-year-old girl. I think he's 18 in that. When I wrote it, he was 15. They kept moving him up, and finally they just settled on 18 because they wouldn't publish it. They wouldn't take the risk.
Look at Tampa, Alyssa Nutting's book got banned in some bookshops. I have some issues with the fact that she's demonised and inhumanised in the book, but certainly to ban this book, which is just meant to look at this issue as a conversation, is a really interesting way of dealing with it.
Well, I guess Erotica starts off as a fantasy first, doesn't it? I mean, it's about exploring fantasies, even if it's just a fantasy of a straight scene, a woman in a back garden and the next door neighbour's boy, drops across the fence. And, I mean, if you start trying to corral fantasies, you end up with thought crime, don't you? And you end up with, a kind of a hiding to nothing, because you will never be able to do that anyway. It just makes the fantasies much more powerful and more mesmerising and attractive.
And how come it's only the sex that suddenly makes it unspeakable?
Exactly.
When you're allowed to put out so many, often male writers, but sometimes female writers, put out these incredibly pornographically violent books that are horrible to women, that are absolutely just appalling. And yet there's no questioning of that anywhere. And as soon as it's about sex, suddenly, sex is dangerous. But I actually think that, violence is way more dangerous than sex. Way more. Like, it's inherently dangerous. So, it's why don't we kind of jump up and down and go, that terrible airport novel that, someone hit this woman across the face. We don't... We don't discuss that.
Matt Riley tells a story of being rung, or I think written to, by a librarian in one of the private schools here in Melbourne, saying, I had to take your books off the shelf. There was a sex scene in the last book, and I can't have the young boys reading that. And so he wrote back saying, you didn't mind the scene where the bad guy held another guy's head behind a jet and then it got burnt off. And I wrote, he wrote 2 pages on describing the violence of that scene. And he said, look, I wrote really, really bad sex scenes. It was probably 2 lines at most, and it was probably very awkward. And yet you don't complain about all the violence in my books once. And these are 13-year-olds reading it. So.
Yeah. Well, I think we can all agree that there is also bad erotica out there, badly written erotica, but perhaps long may it be there and do its good work. I think we'll have to wrap up, but thank you so much to Kate, Krissy and John, and thank you to all of you for being such a great audience. Please stick around and have a drink, and the books will be for sale and the authors will all be here to have a chat about everything. But for now, thank you very much. Thank you.